Hi, I'm Marcel, and today I'll be looking at the post, "What is one aspect or game mechanic that you wish was more widespread in TTRPGs?" by user World Gone Away. Just like the title says, I imagine we've all played enough different RPGs to have gotten a feeling about something that we like to see in terms of game mechanics, or just some aspect or features of the game. So what have you guys got? Personally, I really like the concept of armor soaking damage as opposed to making it more difficult to hit. I agree with that. I think it just makes more sense in my brain. I really like the way Symbaroum does it, where you have a separate dodge roll, and then if you still get hit, you have an armor roll, and then heavier tiers of armor give you more protection from damage, but then they also make it harder to dodge. I think that's a pretty fun trade-off. I also really like the corruption from Symbaroum. It's so cool sounding, and how the sorcerers are able to manipulate that. And I just like any magic system that adds some form of danger or backlash to the user for using it potentially. I think those are really cool. I'm something of a dice goblin, so boons from Shadow of the Demon Lord over advantage for me is something I also really like. And then for more rules light games, I guess, things with less crunch, I really like resource dice. I think resource dice are really cool and just a simple way to track your various resources, and then also that means getting to roll more dice, and I enjoy that. With resource dice and boons and banes, that can be attached onto any sort of dice resolution system if it fits, depending on what you're doing, or I guess you can just switch up the dice. But because that's more out of the game stuff, I guess, it's more reasonable to put that into more games with things like the armor or corruption that could be potentially more in line with, say, certain genres. And then earlier I even said I just prefer resource dice for less crunchy games, so it could be a thing of being more widespread in the various spectrum of crunch, I suppose. I just mean that with how wide the spectrum of TTRPGs are, it's gonna be very hard to find a universal rule that just works for everything. So this would probably be better thought of as what rules could be more widespread within certain circles of TTRPGs. The Witcher TTRPG's verbal combat. I love having the back and forth like it's an actual conversation instead of just one dice roll and a DC. True. I don't know about the Witcher TTRPG, but I think there's another one that I know. I think it was the Dragon Age. No. The Song of Ice and Fire TTRPG, and then later Sword Chronicle when they didn't have the licensing, that also did something with sort of like social combat that works differently than regular combat. And I think, depending on, again, the type of game, those kinds of things are really cool. I'm a fan of political intrigue, so those kinds of things just really appeal to me. I must know more. Can you give me an overview in case my Googling fails? Yeah, I've only played Witcher a few times, so I'm not an expert in anything. It works similar to combat, except instead of HP, your character has resolve. You go back and forth, choosing whether you want to intimidate, persuade, argue, etc. each turn. It's really engaging, and our DM has ported a version of verbal combat into every single D&D game since. Oh, now that I'm thinking about it, I think the 5th edition of Vampire the Masquerade also does something like this. Or just has this idea of verbal combat. If you like that, you should take a look at Burning Wheel. They also have a back and forth social debate system. Ooh, I have a copy of the Burning Wheel. I should give that a look. Circle rolls from the Burning Wheel. The ability derived from character stats to say to the GM, "Hey, I'd like to invent an NPC and I'm willing to roll for it." The more specific, the harder the roll, and it's a literal stat your character has. A measure of correctedness, not just a charisma or skill roll. This is really interesting. I know a lot of other games do that in the form of meta currencies, where players can spend meta currency for either mechanical bonuses or affecting the story in some way. I haven't fully read through the Burning Wheel, so I don't know what kind of vibe the game has. Just off of my gut, I'm thinking I would just prefer a meta currency system. Armor soaking is in a ton of games, so what do you mean by more widespread? In my experience, it is in fact much more common than it making you harder to hit. Really, I can only think of the D&D ecosystem that does that. I suppose Anima sort of does it, but it more reduces the attacker's successful MOS for damage calculation, possibly to 0, rather than making you harder to hit. You still count as having been struck for effects that care, but the feel is still insufficient. Attack roll equals no damage. Well, to be fair, around 50% of RPGs and 90% of the money is in the D&D ecosystem in RPGs. D&D, Pathfinder, OSR games, including newer ones like Shadowdark, OSR Nier games, Goblin Slayer, Dragonbane, etc., also have many D&D inspired mechanics, although often armor as soak. D&D clones / Heartbreakers, Draw Steel, DC 20, Tales of the Valiant, etc. Of course, not all of them use armor as hit chance, but D&D ecosystem is just huge. I think that is also an important thing to look at. I've once heard some people say that some people don't play TTRPGs, they play D&D because it just takes up so much share of the ecosystem. And it's to the point where you can split channels between TTRPG general channels and D&D focused channels. And hell, the D&D focused ones are a lot more popular than the general TTRPG ones, though generally specific focus niche channels I think just do better on YouTube. So perhaps that's why. All of this to say, I know I did one thing on another video where I looked at the top post and it was just a really bland common sentiment. So I did that one and then just skipped over anything else like it, I guess. I don't know too much about the entire TTRPG landscape, obviously, because I don't think most people do. I'm gonna try and skip over anything that seems more in the line of it's widespread, it's just not used in the main TTRPGs that a bunch of people play. I wish more people had access to a group of players who are interested in similar things, or willing to try new things. Pretty much everything everyone wants in this discussion is something already available, and it seems like what people really want is for their own preferences to be more mainstream so that they don't struggle to find games that meet their preferences. I don't need any given mechanic to be more widespread, because if I want that mechanic, I add it to my game, or pick a game that already has it, and arrange to run it with my friends. I wish everyone was in a similar situation to me, and could play or run pretty much any game of interest to them. Edit to add, I think the OP phrased this question as a positive. What do you like and want more of? Too often when I see questions along these lines, the opposite tack is taken, with people being asked what features and mechanics they want to eliminate from the hobby, as if the people that like those things don't deserve to have fun. Okay, so this was supposed to be about mechanics. This might just be a meta question or a meta discussion instead. I think this is true. I don't think I've ever heard of any game where it's like the only one that has this certain mechanic and you have to play this one to get this mechanic. Because if it's a good mechanic, then yeah, other people are gonna copy and steal it. As they say, a good author writes, a great author steals, and it seems the same is in games and TTRPGs and basically anything. While it may be true that some people just want to see more games with their preferences, I think an interesting thing can be brought up with the previous response, where they were talking about how D&D and that kind of ilk take up basically 90% of the TTRPG ecosystem. So rather than just wanting more games with their preference, I know with some people, it's just they want their game or games like their game to be more popular, to be more mainstream, because when you like something, you want other people to experience it. And when you think something is quality, you probably want more people to be able to see it and take from it. Alternatively, they're just really arrogant and want to be like, oh yeah, actually, my game is better than yours, and because of that, it should be more popular than that D&D filth. And I think this goes into the edit that this person made about how this was actually a positive question rather than a negative question. I know in another one of my videos, another discussion post, it was talking about how basically negative things gain a lot more traction on social media than positive things. Because I guess that's just human nature. We see a lot of negative things online, we interact with a lot of negative things online. People say they want more positive things, but we just don't interact with them. I believe psychologically, don't quote me on this, it might be wrong. I believe potentially psychologically we're even more wired to remember negative things better than positive things. It could also just be that elitist attitude of, not just wanting your game to be more popular so more people can experience it because it's better than D&D or whatever, but just, oh yeah, D&D should be oh yeah, D&D should be gone because it's like a horrible game that does basically nothing right, and just every other TTRPG is better. I know r/RPG kind of has that attitude sometimes, at least some people. For a while, it was very popular to just see basically every post on the subreddit just be people trashing D&D because I think it was around the time that the OSR debacle, sorry, not the OSR, the SRD debacle happened, and just that it was a bunch of fuel for that hatred or whatever, and that just exploded, and yeah. Anyhow, before I invalidate the point of this video anymore, let's continue. Call of Cthulhu's luck mechanic, being able to turn failures into successes when you need it, but the more you do it, the less you'll have for when you might need it again. This makes the game far more cinematic and fun for players. Generally, I don't like luck as a stat in TTRPGs because that's the whole point of the dice, TTRPGs as a general, I guess, except I know there are some diceless TTRPGs out there, or maybe that, doesn't have luck in it, so there's a few outliers, but as a general, it's just part of the DNA of TTRPGs. That being said, I do like that you can spend luck in Call of Cthulhu to turn to turn failures into successes. I think that's really interesting, and having that limited pool to pull from. To further this, because we're on the topic of Call of Cthulhu anyways, I really like pushing rolls. I think more games should have the ability for you to push your rolls. Especially because in really dire situations when there's that drama of, ooh, I can push my roll, I can try to push myself more into success, but at a cost of greater failure, I think that's really fun for games, or as a potential rule or whatever, if you're trying to be more cinematic about your games. Hi, it's our seal. Just stopping by for a quick little intermission since we're about the halfway point of the video. I would hope that you like it so far, so if you could do me the honors of liking and subscribing and perhaps turning on your notifications, that would be so awesome sauce. Anyhow, back to the video. Fighting maneuvers, whether it's shoves, disarms, multi-attacks, acrobatics, etc., given to characters for free, not as a trade-off for damage or accuracy, which makes them often be a subpar option, making players default to I attack. Incentivize more interesting descriptions of fighting moves instead. Tales of Argosa does a good job at it, I think. I am also a fan of fighting maneuvers. I do like the idea of trade-offs because, I don't know, even if it makes them not as efficient sometimes, I think that should just be a thing you should try to balance around. Obviously, it can't be that way all the time. I just think they're interesting that way. Same for opportunity attacks for disengaging or equivalent rule, which makes combat super static. Honestly, I don't feel that just retreating should be penalized that badly from a foe who is not actively charging or pursuing. I think that a tackle zone could remain to enable intercepting attacks or blocking combatant running past, but just creating space from someone you're facing is often made out to be a strange sort of move or impossible, which is weird. I can see the reasoning for this. I think what could be a cool little design space for that kind of thing is basically, if you're engaged in melee with an enemy, if you're going to move away from them to do something else, obviously you need to be more concentrated on that enemy so that they can't attack you as you're going away. That's the whole point of disengage. You're putting your full focus into that. Another thing that I think would be interesting is keep that idea of a disengage if you want to move your full movement away from someone. Maybe if you want to move away from someone without using one of your actions or your energy, To do that, you just take a movement penalty. And then you have the disengage if you want to make the full movement. And then there can be certain design space for abilities or enemies that make it so to even leave for that half movement outside of their area normally, you still have to take the disengage. This probably isn't a good mechanic. I'm thinking of this off the top of my head, just, I don't know, because they're talking about it, and I'm supposed to talk about what they're talking about. Anyhow, this is probably more important for games with a focus on combat. So, if that's not what the game's about, you don't need to devote time and game space for this. Oh, with a little extra bit on one of those games, in Tales of Argosa, there's a mechanic called Exploit. When you roll an attack and hit, you can say, I want to roll for Exploit. Exploit are split between two types, minor and major. They are extremely flexible on what they can do, and the best part? It doesn't switch your damage. You hit the enemy, did the damage and then the effect, and if you succeed your Exploit roll, you also do your Exploit. I guess that works fine too. Clearly, because these people are talking about it, I assume it was a well-designed mechanic, at least in that game. Resource generation instead of resource depletion. I know this is... one of my commenters talked about this in, I think, DC 20 is how that game does things. Resource management games only work if the players can effectively understand the duration they need to manage those resources through. Gloomhaven is an example of this done well, as every encounter is roughly the same length and your resources reset before each encounter, but most proper RPGs have players needing to hoard their resources just in case there's something worse after this fight or whatnot. Yeah, I know that can be a problem sometimes. It's just, again, this is a very dependent on the game type of thing, I think. What is the sort of tone and mood that your game wants to go for? For something more heroic, I think, yeah, resource generation probably is the better way to go. If you're trying to be heroes and awesome and all of that. The feeling of ramping up each fight, I think would be good for that style of play. But if you're doing something more, say, and excuse my French, dark and gritty, then having that threat and stress of resource depletion works better for that, especially if the game's more deadly, because then sure, just in case there's something worse after this fight, let's hoard our resources. Well, you can't, because if you don't use them, you're going to die. The fighting game genre of video games figured this out ages ago. The big character abilities need to be charged up by playing the game. They are a reward you unlock by effective play, and something you are encouraged to use when it's available so that you can start charging it up again. It depends on the game. This also means that these big flashy abilities are more likely to appear at the end of an encounter rather than the beginning, like how a satisfying narrative should be. If you don't already know about it, you should look at Draw Steel. That might have been the one, actually, not DC 20. Their class mechanics are centered around resource generation. Consistency in general. Boy, if that ain't true. Generics do great at this, and rules light have tended in this direction, but weird one-off rules linger. This playbook gets this equipment, this spell has this range, this superpower has X strength per Y points. The only way to know it is by looking it up or memorizing. 2E D&D spells and 3.X class abilities were full of this. Weird stuff you just had to know. Well, okay, well, I disagree with this. I think consistency in certain mechanics has its place, obviously. You want the game to run smoothly, but I think it's fine to have certain abilities that just do the things that they do that may be a little different than other things. Especially if it's player-facing, if it's a class ability, if it's a player ability. You get this cool thing that other people can't do, and that's awesome. Or just this thing that, while maybe is similar or has parallels along other things, works differently, so you feel a little unique, and I think that is okay. Fabula Ultima's villain mechanics. This one's a good one. Each villain has a pool of points that the GM can use for various effects, but most importantly, you can use them to give the villain an inexplicable escape that can't be interfered with by the players. Allows the villain to be more active without having to use a GM fiat to protect the villain. Once they run out, and the villain is defeated, the GM has the option to either let the villain be defeated permanently or to be vanquished and come back in a new form with a new pool of points and abilities. It makes running villains so fun and interactive, since they keep their original form and you get to design new abilities based on the story and how the players defeated them. It especially makes sense for Fabula Ultima because it's based on JRPG tropes and design, and I've played a few JRPGs in my life, just a bit, and this really mimics how some of the villains and those things work. It's really fun. And I think also for the point of the villain coming back in new form, you're only allowed to do that once per villain, so you don't have a thing like, say, Hubert, I think, in Fire Emblem Three Houses, where he just keeps running away. I can't fall here, I must make my escape. So it has that feel, that utility that goes well with the game, but also doesn't make it super annoying. It's a small thing I've seen in a bunch of Powered by the Apocalypse games, but the mechanic of incorporating PC relationships into character creation. Shouldn't the PCs already be doing this anyways, or like if they want to, you know? I've played games without this as a built-in mechanic, and sometimes my players just like to have pre-made relationships with each other. Failing forward from... Oh, okay, I know that one's Powered by the Apocalypse. Monster of the Week, I found it. I love people getting experience points towards leveling up from failed rolls. Takes the sting out of it. Not gonna lie, the phrase, you don't fail, you just mark experience, has become weirdly inspirational for me. Yeah, I know it's not, well, like, I guess RuneQuest and Call of Cthulhu do this, where even if you fail the roll, you still get to mark it for the potential experience gain. And like, I like that part of it, but I thought there was more to the idea of failing forward from Powered by the Apocalypse and that kind of stuff than just like the experience gain. Yeah, there's an issue in some games where players just loathe to try something they're not good at. This counteracts that to some degree. I mean, I think most of the time it just depends on the stakes. Like, if you know you're not good at something and there's a lot riding on you succeeding rather than failing, I feel like it's just a normal strategic decision to not go for it. I also like the BRP style of motivation, where you get an experience check on success. You take the odd chance of success and can end up getting better. Had a chance of no medic player in a group, and by the end, a player raised their first aid from like 10% to 60% because they kept trying to patch everyone up. I love all mechanics that give some incentive to try even if you aren't amazing. Wait, I thought, well, I don't have the full basic roleplay book, and I'm sure that one just has like different things in it because it's supposed to be a generic system that you can pick and pull from. What I'm used to is that you still just get the experience tick and then a chance of a skill increase at either the end of the session or like certain intervals within the game world. Well, whether you fail or succeed, you get the tick. And then you had to fail that experience check to then raise your skill level. And then I know at least RuneQuest does this thing where if you get a critical failure, you just get an automatic experience gain check right there, but that's only on if you critically fail, not succeed. I think shared GMing responsibilities for setting elements should be spread outside of NDNM games and into the mainstream. Oh, okay, I just looked it up. That's No Dice, No Masters. And yeah, you probably get what it is from the name. Can start out simple, just a line on the character sheet or whatever that states, when I'm not in the scene I describe. Natural things, buildings and architecture, fashion, whatever. Can expand that even further to what games like Polaris do, e.g. player to your left plays all your close personal/emotional relationships. Okay, so that last little bit is kinda cool. It's just, I don't know, man. I know Fabula Ultima does a little bit of this, but that's more just for like world creation, and I mean, I'll let my players make up things if they fit my world. I'm not strict on it only being my setting, right? But it depends on the game, it depends on the setting. I think that's the point here. I think with just having the idea of there being a dungeon master, like a game master that oversees everything, just makes it a little too different from what ND&M games are going for. There's a different expectation that you have when going in, right? And some of that can carry over. I don't think all of it can carry over. Thank you for making it all the way to the end of the video. It really means a lot to me. If you have your own rules from RPGs that you like that you wish were more widespread in the greater TTRPG space, I'd love to hear them in the comments. Or if you'd like to comment on the little meta discussion that we had in the middle there, that would also be fine by me. I don't know if I could make a full video off of sort of like that idea that I had on those 2 posts for just like a whole video, but if you're interested in maybe seeing some more of my personal thoughts, or just having that be full video material, depending on like various topics that I could be discussing, I have a few in mind. If you'd like to hear about that sort of thing, just say so in the comments and maybe I'll get something whipped up. If college allows me the time to, anyway. Anyhow, bye-bye!